At 74, Ruth Caldwell thought the hardest day of her life was behind her. Her husband of 52 years had been buried 18 months earlier, and she had already learned what a silent house felt like. She was wrong. On a cold afternoon in early November, her only daughter drove her to a small bus station in a town she had never seen, pressed a one-way ticket into her hand, and drove away without turning her head once. Ruth sat on the metal bench with 2 worn suitcases at her feet. Her fingers slipped into her coat pocket and closed around the one thing she had almost forgotten. An old brass locker key her husband Theodore had given her 3 months before he died. If this story touches something quiet in you, stay with me until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories worth watching. The bus station in Millbrook was smaller than Ruth had expected. 4 metal benches bolted to a concrete floor, a ticket window that had been closed since 2 that afternoon, and a row of grey lockers along the back wall. Outside, the sky had turned the color of wet stone. Angela had parked her silver SUV in front of the entrance and walked Ruth inside with the same brisk steps she used when taking her son to dentist appointments. "Mom, you'll be fine," she had said. "It's a nice facility. Mrs. Patterson is going to pick you up at 6. I already called ahead." Ruth had looked down at the ticket in her hand. Riverbend Senior Living, Millbrook, Virginia. One way. "Angela, I don't—" "Mom." Angela had cut her off, not with anger, only with a practiced, exhausted patience. "We've been over this. Tyler needs his room back, and you need actual care." Ruth had not answered. The big house Angela was referring to was Angela's own house, the house Ruth had lived in for 18 months since selling the home she and Theodore had shared for 47 years. The house where she had learned to tiptoe around breakfast, to take her medicine in her own bedroom, to say yes to every small arrangement so as not to become a bigger burden than she already was. Angela had kissed her cheek quickly, dry. Then she had walked out without looking back, started her SUV, and pulled onto the highway. Ruth sat down on the second bench from the door. She placed her 2 suitcases in front of her knees together, her hands folded on her handbag. The clock above the ticket window read 4:17. Mrs. Patterson, whoever that was, would not arrive for another hour and 43 minutes. She did not cry. She had spent nearly all her crying in the first month after Theodore's funeral, and what was left of it she had used up in small, unseen doses over the past year and a half. Ruth's fingers, almost without her knowing, slipped into the right pocket of her coat. They moved past the folded handkerchief, past the cough drops, and closed around a small piece of cold brass at the very bottom. The key. Ruth pulled it out and laid it flat in her palm. It was no bigger than her thumb, made of old brass that had darkened to the color of weak tea. A number stamped into the disc near the top, 117. Then the afternoon came back. It had been a Wednesday in early August, about 3 months before Theodore died. By that point, the doctors had already said there was nothing more to be done. He had asked to be driven to Millbrook, just for the day, just to see the old place one more time. They had driven 2.5 hours from Roanoke without the radio on. Theodore in the passenger seat, a little yellow with the medication by then. On the way back, Theodore had asked her to stop at the bus station. She had raised her eyebrows. He had smiled without explaining. Inside, he had gone directly to the wall of lockers, as if he had been there many times before. He had turned the dial on a small padlock at locker 117, opened the door a hand's width, and placed something into it. Then he had closed it again. He had taken a small brass key from his pocket and pressed it into hers. "Put this somewhere you won't think about," he had said. "Put it in a coat pocket. Put it anywhere a person never looks at on purpose." "Theo, what is this?" "It's yours now." "I don't understand." He had looked at her for a long time then. Not smiling, not sad, only serious in a way he almost never was. "Ruthie, if things ever go truly wrong, if you ever find yourself in a place where you're not sure who is still on your side, come to this locker. Don't tell Angela. Don't tell anyone." Ruth had almost laughed at him. What could possibly go that wrong? He had only placed his hand on top of hers and said, "I hope you never need to find out." In the months after his funeral, Ruth had put the key into the pocket of her old wool coat, and she had not thought about it again. An echo, nothing more. Until today. Ruth closed her hand around the key. She stood up slowly, left the two suitcases where they were, and walked to the back wall. Her eyes moved along the small numbered plates. 101, 108, 113, 115, 117. She stood in front of locker 117 without moving for almost a full minute. Then she lifted the key, fit it into the old padlock, and turned. The padlock opened with a soft, dry click. Ruth pulled the locker door toward her. The smell that came out was the smell of dry paper and old wood, the exact smell of Theodore's workshop many years ago. Inside were 4 things. A thick brown envelope tied with twine, a small leather-bound savings passbook, a ring of 3 keys on a short leather loop, and a sheet of Theodore's yellow-lined notebook paper folded into thirds. Ruth took them all out slowly and carried them back to the bench near the door. She opened the folded paper first. The handwriting was Theodore's, slanted slightly to the right, steady at the beginning, then growing a little looser toward the end, the way his writing had looked in the last year of his life. Ruthie, if you're reading this, I was right about something I hoped I was wrong about. I'm sorry. I hoped you would throw the key into a drawer and never find it again. The cottage outside of Millbrook is yours, so is the shop behind it. They belong to me the same way they belonged to my father before me, on a deed that has my name alone. Angela has never known these places exist. I saw things in her a long time ago that I chose not to name out loud, and I wanted you to have something she could not touch. The bank book is from Millbrook Savings and Loan. There are a little over $87,000 in it. That is, every dollar I put aside from private furniture jobs over 40 years. Go see Arthur Pembroke. His office is on Oak Street, next to the old hardware store. He has the rest of the paperwork. Ruthie, please don't feel bad about taking what is already yours. I spent my whole life trying to build something quiet that could still be there when we needed it. Please let it be there now. I love you. I always have. Theo. Ruth read the letter twice. When she reached the last line the second time, she folded the paper back into thirds and set it on her knee. Her hand was still steady. She had not yet fully decided to cry and had not yet fully decided not to. For a long time she only sat there. At some point a young woman in a blue uniform came out from a door behind the counter and began turning off some of the overhead lights. She glanced at Ruth, then glanced again, and came over carefully. "Ma'am, are you waiting for someone?" Ruth looked up at her. "No," she said. "Not anymore." The young woman's name was Della. She pointed her toward a motel 2 blocks down called the Laurel Inn, and offered to carry one of her suitcases since she was off shift anyway. They walked together down the main street. A diner with yellow light in the windows, a barber shop, a hardware store with a sign that said Pembroke Law Office, 2nd floor, a small arrow pointing up a staircase. Ruth slowed when she saw it. She did not stop. She only slowed. At the Laurel Inn, Mrs. Donner did not ask any questions. She said, "Room 7 on the left," and handed her a key on a ring with a plastic laurel leaf. Ruth sat on the edge of the narrow bed in room 7 for a long time with her coat still on. She only looked at the ring of 3 keys resting in her palm. Tomorrow she would go to Arthur Pembroke. Tonight she would only sleep. She slept deeper than she had slept in 18 months. The next morning, Ruth walked into the office above the hardware store at 10 minutes past 9. The frosted glass door at the top of the narrow staircase said, A. Pembroke, attorney, in slightly crooked gold letters. Arthur Pembroke was in his late 70s, tall, a little stooped, with grey hair combed back neatly and a pair of wire glasses slipped down on his nose. When he saw her, he stood up slowly. "Ruth. It is Ruth, isn't it?" "Yes." "Theo showed me a picture of you once, about 30 years ago." He came around the desk and took both her hands in his. "I am very sorry for your loss, and I have been waiting for you, in a manner of speaking, for almost 2 years." He led her to a chair across from his desk. "Theo came to see me in July of the year he died. We prepared a number of documents. Since then, I have been paying the taxes on the cottage and the shop out of a small escrow account he left with me. I have also been checking on the properties about once every 2 months. They are standing and dry and waiting." He took out a thick folder. "This is all yours. The deed to the house, the deed to the shop, a record of the last property tax payments, and a note from Theo that he asked me to give you in person when you finally came." Ruth took the folder with both hands. Arthur sat back down. "May I ask you a question?" "Yes." "Was it your daughter?" Ruth lifted her eyes. She had not expected him to know. "Theo mentioned her," Arthur said gently. "Only once. He said he hoped he was wrong. He said if I ever saw you alone in this office, I would know that he was not." Ruth nodded once. "I thought she was only tired. I have been telling myself that for 1.5 years. Arthur let that sit between them. Then he said, "There is one more thing. Are you able to tell me what happened to the money from the sale of your house in Roanoke?" "Angela said it was in a savings account in my name. She said she would hand me the debit card when I felt ready." "Do you have that card?" "No." "Have you seen any statement?" "No." Arthur took off his glasses, folded them, and set them on the desk. "I would like to look into that for you, with your permission." Ruth was quiet for a long time. "Yes," she said finally. "Please." The cottage was 15 minutes outside of Millbrook, up a curving 2-lane road that opened suddenly onto a shallow valley with a creek running through it. Arthur drove her out there himself that same afternoon. When he turned into the narrow gravel driveway, Ruth saw the house for the first time in almost 20 years. It was a small, single-story place with grey shingle siding, a stone chimney on one end, and a covered porch across the front. 2 rocking chairs still sat on the porch. The grass in the yard had grown long but not wild. The shop stood behind the cottage, a long, low building with wide double doors and a slanted tin roof. Theodore's father had built it in the 1940s. Angela had never been brought there at all. "I'll wait in the car," Arthur said. Ruth took the ring of keys and walked up to the porch by herself. The 3rd key, the smallest one, opened the cottage door. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar. A sofa with a grey wool throw folded across the back. A wood stove in the corner. A kitchen with white painted cabinets and a window that looked out over the creek. In the bedroom, a pale quilt, white pillowcases, one on each side. On the small table beside the bed was a framed photograph she had never seen before. A photograph of her, taken in their backyard in Roanoke maybe 30 years earlier, laughing at something out of the frame with both hands pressed to her cheeks. She did not remember the moment, but Theodore had kept it here, in a place no one but him ever went. Ruth sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since Angela had left her at the bus station, she cried. She did not cry for long. She was not a long cry kind of woman, but she let it come, and she let it go, and when it was finished, she wiped her face with her handkerchief and stood up. The shop was colder than the house. She pushed both doors open to let the afternoon light slide across the concrete floor. A long workbench ran down the center. Tools hung in their silhouettes on a pegboard along one wall, each outlined in black paint so you could see exactly where it belonged, even when it was missing. Nothing was missing. On the far end of the bench was a small unfinished project. a cherrywood cutting board, sanded on one side and not yet on the other, a square of sandpaper still lying beside it. Theodore had left it in the middle of a motion, and the shop had simply waited. Ruth lifted the cutting board in both hands. She had helped Theodore in this shop a few times, not often. She had never thought of herself as someone who made things. But her hands remembered the sandpaper. She brought the cutting board inside that evening. She sanded the unfinished side at the kitchen table, with the wood stove burning for the first time in almost 2 years. When the surface was smooth, she rubbed a thin coat of mineral oil into the grain the way Theodore had shown her once. The wood came alive under her hands. She slept that first night in the pale quilted bed, with a small fire in the stove, and the creek running past outside the window. She slept deeper than the night before. 3 weeks passed more quickly than Ruth would have expected, and at the same time more slowly than any 3 weeks of her adult life. She cleaned the cottage one room at a time. She washed the windows and beat the throw rugs out over the porch rail. She discovered that the chimney needed sweeping and called a man in town named Clyde Everest, whose number was pinned to a corkboard beside Theodore's workbench. Clyde came out the next morning, swept the chimney, and when he saw the tools in the shop, said quietly, "That's the Caldwell shop. I thought it was gone for good." "It isn't gone," Ruth said. "No, ma'am, I can see that." Word in a small town moves faster than weather. By the end of the first week, 2 women from the church 2 miles down the road had come by with a casserole and a jar of apple butter. By the end of the second week, the postman had learned her name. By the end of the third week, a man named Arlan, who ran the general store in town, had left a note on her porch asking whether she would consider making him 6 cutting boards and 2 rolling pins, and whether she would let him sell them on consignment. Ruth read the note twice. Then she walked out to the shop, put on one of Theodore's old canvas work aprons, and started pulling cherry boards off the lumber rack. Her hands were not as strong as they had been at 40. They did not need to be. At night, she rubbed her shoulders with liniment and slept without dreaming. Arthur Pembroke called her near the end of the second week. "Ruth, I have some information for you. Do you have time to come in tomorrow morning?" She drove in the next morning in an old blue Ford Theodore had left in the shed. Arthur had the folder open on his desk when she arrived. "The money from your house in Roanoke was deposited into a joint account your daughter opened in both her name and yours at a bank in Charlotte 2 days before the sale closed." "I never signed for that account." "I know you didn't. The signature on the account opening form is closed, but it isn't yours. I had a friend at the bank examine it." Ruth sat very still. Over the 18 months that followed, approximately $214,000 was withdrawn from that account in increments small enough not to trigger any automatic reporting. The remaining balance is $3,412. She said nothing. "I have enough here to start a civil action, and I would be willing to do it for you at no charge, for Theo's sake and for yours. But I want to ask you something before we go any further. What is it you actually want, Ruth?" She sat with her hands folded in her lap for a long time. She thought about Angela at 9, running across a wet lawn with a colored ribbon in her hair. She thought about Angela at 26, in a white dress in a church in Roanoke. She thought about Angela at 46, pulling out of the bus station parking lot without looking in the rearview mirror. "I don't want the money back," Ruth said at last. "I don't want to see her in a courtroom. I don't want to see her name in a newspaper. I have enough. I have a roof and a shop and the creek and the town that knows my name after 3 weeks. All right. But I want her to know that I know. I want her to know that I am not lost. And I want it in writing, from you, somewhere she cannot pretend not to have seen it." Arthur nodded once. "I can do that." 10 days later, a certified letter left Arthur's office for a house in Charlotte, North Carolina. It did not demand anything. It did not threaten. It laid out the facts in clear language and closed with a single sentence. Mrs. Ruth Caldwell is well. She is settled. She does not wish to pursue further action, and she does not wish to be contacted at this time. Angela came anyway. She came on a Thursday afternoon in the 5th week, driving the silver SUV up the gravel drive too fast. She parked at a diagonal near the porch and sat for a full minute behind the wheel with the engine running, looking at the cottage, at the shop, at the old blue Ford parked under the shed. Ruth saw her through the kitchen window. She set down the rolling pin she had been wrapping in brown paper, took off her apron, and walked out onto the porch. Angela climbed out of the SUV. She was wearing a camel-colored coat Ruth had not seen before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Mom," Angela said. "Angela, can I come in? We can sit on the porch." Angela's jaw tightened for only half a second, then relaxed. She walked up the steps and sat in the rocking chair with the faded cushion. Ruth sat in the other. "I got the letter," Angela said. "I thought you would. Some of what is in it is not accurate." Ruth did not answer. "Mom, it is complicated. Marcus and I there were expenses. Tyler's school, the second mortgage." "Angela," Ruth said it softly, not sharply, only softly enough that Angela stopped. "I am 74 years old," Ruth said. "I have spent more of my life than you have been alive, raising you, cooking for you, cleaning up after you, lying awake when you had a fever, worrying when you were in college, smiling at your husband at family dinners even when I did not want to, and moving into your spare bedroom because you said you wanted me close. I do not want to sit on this porch and listen to you explain numbers. I know the numbers." Angela's eyes had filled, but she did not cry. "Then why did you even send the letter? Why did you want me to come?" "I did not want you to come." "Then what?" Ruth looked out at the creek. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that you didn't get away with it. Not because I want to punish you. I don't have that in me. But because I think you spent 18 months believing you had made me disappear, and I wanted you to know that you didn't." Angela lowered her face into her hands. Ruth watched her for a long time without moving. "I thought you wouldn't survive on your own," Angela said through her fingers. "I thought you would be helpless. I thought I was doing the best thing by taking care of everything." "You were not taking care of me, Angela." "I know. You were taking care of yourself, using my life." Angela lifted her face. There were tears on it now. "Is there any way back?" she asked. Ruth thought about that. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Not soon. Maybe not ever. But if there is, it is not going to start today. And it is not going to start with you driving up here in that car." Angela stood up slowly. She looked at the cottage, at the shop, at the porch where her mother was sitting with her hands folded in her lap. "Dad knew," she said quietly, "about all of this." "Yes." "He never told me." "No," Ruth said, "he didn't." Angela nodded once, tightly, and walked back down the steps to her SUV. She did not look back as she drove out the gravel drive. Ruth watched the car until it disappeared around the bend where the oaks closed over the road. Then she went back inside. She finished wrapping the rolling pin. She labeled the brown paper in pencil. She put it into the canvas bag for Harlan. And she made a pot of tea, and she sat by the stove, and she did not cry. Winter came to Millbrook gradually and then all at once. The creek skimmed over with ice in the 3rd week of December. The cottage, with its stove burning steadily and the cherry-cutting boards lined up on the workbench, held the cold out easily. Harlan sold out of the cutting boards twice before Christmas. A woman from an inn over in Lexington drove out one Saturday to ask whether Ruth would make her a set of walnut salad bowls. A young man with a camera came by in January to photograph the shop for a small magazine about Virginia craftsmen. Ruth asked him politely not to photograph her face, and he did not. Arthur Pembroke came out once a month to check in, usually on a Sunday afternoon, usually with a small box of lemon cookies from a baker in town. He never stayed long. He never charged her for his time. Ruth understood, without it ever being said out loud, that he considered this his own small way of keeping a promise to a friend. In February, a letter came from Angela. It was handwritten, 3 pages long, and not what Ruth had expected. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for forgiveness in so many words. It said, among other things, I do not know who I am when I am not taking from someone. I am trying to learn. I do not expect anything from you. I only wanted to tell you that I am trying. Ruth read it twice, folded it and put it in the drawer of the small desk by the window. She did not answer it. Not that month. Maybe the next. Maybe not for a year. Tyler, her grandson, wrote to her in March. A single page. He signed it with his full name, as if he were not sure whether he was allowed to use the word grandson anymore. Ruth wrote him back the same afternoon, and from then on, they wrote to each other every few weeks. On an afternoon in the second autumn, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked out at the oaks on the drive. They had turned the deep red color only old trees get in that part of the country. She thought, very briefly, of a metal bench in a bus station in early November, of a daughter's silver SUV pulling away, of a ticket in her hand with the wrong destination printed on it. She thought of Theodore, standing in front of locker 117 on a Wednesday in August, pressing a small brass key into her palm and asking her to forget it. She had not forgotten it. Somewhere in her, she understood now, she had been carrying it on purpose. Not in the front of her mind, but in the place a person keeps the things they hope they will never need, and are quietly grateful to have anyway. Angela had taken the house in Charlotte. She had taken the bank account. She had taken 18 months of Ruth's time and quite a lot of Ruth's money. She had driven away from a bus station on a cold afternoon, believing she had finished something. But there had been one thing Angela could never have taken, because she had never known it existed. A small cottage up a gravel road. A shop full of tools with their silhouettes painted behind them. A man's steady handwriting on a yellow sheet of paper. A life built carefully over many decades by somebody who had loved her enough to prepare, quietly, for a day he hoped would never come. Ruth finished her tea. She set the cup on the small table beside the rocking chair. She stood up and walked back into the cottage, where the wood stove was burning steadily and a cherry wood cutting board was waiting for its second coat of oil. If you have stayed with this story all the way to here, thank you for giving your time to a woman who did not raise her voice, did not demand anything back, and did not try to win against anyone. If this story reminds you of someone, a mother, a grandmother, a friend, someone who was treated as though she could be put down at a bus station and forgotten, send it to them. And if you would like more stories like this, stories about quiet people and the small keys they carry in their pockets, leave a sign, so I know you are still here.